The first thing that hit me was the smell of diesel exhaust, thick and greasy, cutting through the sweet, humid Georgia air heavy with the scent of waterlogged cypress and blooming magnolia. The second was the glint of the afternoon sun on a silver SUV idling pointedly at the foot of my new dock, its driver's side door already open. I was on my knees, wrestling a cardboard box marked Kitchen Fragile, my shirt stuck to my back with a full day's sweat. I'd owned the lake house for 72 hours. The welcoming committee had arrived. A woman emerged from the SUV, a study in stark contrasts against the lush, untamed backdrop of Lake Serene. She was all sharp angles and pristine white capris, a silk blouse the color of a mint julep, and hair, a helmet of bottled blonde that didn't move in the gentle breeze. She looked like she'd been starched and pressed, a walking violation notice. Behind her, a hulking man in a too-tight polo shirt leaned against the vehicle, arms crossed over, a barrel chest. His mirrored sunglasses reflected my dishevelment back at me, a tiny, sweaty man drowning in boxes. "Mr. Vance." Her voice was like gravel smoothed over by expensive tires, a practiced corporate friendliness that didn't reach her eyes. "Barbara Whitlock, president of the Heron's Crest Homeowners Association. And this is Carl, our head of community compliance." I wiped my forearm across my brow, leaving a streak of dust. "Community compliance? That sounds official. Can I help you folks? I'm a little in the weeds here, as you can see." I gestured to the chaos of my moving truck, its ramp still down like a tired tongue. Barbara's smile was a thin, tight line. "We won't take much of your time. We're just here to discuss the dock." She turned her razor-sharp gaze toward the structure in question. It was old, its wood weathered to a soft silver gray, but it was solid. It had been one of the main reasons I'd bought the place, my own little pier into the peaceful, glassy water. "What about it?" I asked, a cold knot beginning to form in my gut, a sensation I hadn't felt since my last tour. The feeling of a perfectly laid plan seconds from going catastrophically wrong. "It's non-compliant," she stated, as if reading from a grocery list. "The permit on file is invalid. It extends 3 feet beyond the property's designated riparian right-of-way. It presents a navigational hazard and violates 17 separate articles of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions." The words were bureaucratic mush, but the intent was crystal clear. This was an attack, a targeted, pre-planned incursion. I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to me. "Whoa, hold on. Invalid? The survey was done last month. The title company cleared everything. I've got the paperwork inside." Barbara's smile didn't flicker. "The paperwork you have is from the seller. Unfortunately, the seller was misinformed. The permit was issued in error by a previous county official. It was revoked 6 months ago. The dock, Mr. Vance, is illegal. It needs to be removed. You have 72 hours to arrange for its demolition." The world seemed to narrow, the buzzing of the cicadas in the tall pines swelling to a deafening roar. Demolition. 72 hours. I'd just gotten here. This dock, it was where I'd pictured myself drinking my morning coffee, fishing, with my nephew, watching the sunset with a book in my hand. It was the dream. And this woman, with her clipboard and her hired muscle, was standing on my property telling me to tear it down. "That's not going to happen," I said, my voice dropping, all pretense of neighborly charm gone. The soldier in me was rising to the surface, the part that assessed threats and fortified positions. "You show me a current official county revocation notice, and then we'll talk. Until then, this is my property." Carl shifted his weight. The movement deliberate, meant to be seen. A silent show of force. Barbara's eyes glinted with something colder than annoyance. It was enjoyment. She was enjoying this. "This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice syrupy with faux sympathy. "It's a directive from the HOA board. We govern the aesthetics and safety of this community. That dock is an eyesore and a liability. If you choose not to comply, the association will have it removed and bill you for the cost. And I can assure you the fines for non-compliance will accrue daily at a rate that will make your mortgage seem like pocket change. She reached into her SUV and pulled out a thick envelope. She held it out, not stepping closer to me, making me come to her. I walked over, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway, and took it. It was heavy, the weight of 1,000 petty tyrannies. "Welcome to Heron's Crest," she said, her smile finally reaching her eyes, and it was a terrifying thing to see. "We do things the right way here." Without another word, she slid back into her climate-controlled SUV. Carl gave me one last long look in the mirrored lenses of his sunglasses, a look that promised future complications, before getting in and slamming the door. They reversed down my drive, the diesel engine grumbling, and disappeared around the bend, leaving me standing there in the sudden, oppressive quiet, the envelope feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I tore it open. It was a packet of documents, fines, notices of violation, a hearing date, and a diagram of my property with my beloved dock circled in angry red ink. The first knowledge bomb detonated in my mind, a piece of trivia from my own past research when I was looking at houses governed by HOAs. I remembered reading about riparian rights, the legal principle governing land that borders water. In most states, those rights are granted to the property owner, not an HOA. Their authority typically stops at the high water mark. For them to claim jurisdiction over a structure actually in the water was a massive overreach, a power play disguised as policy. They were bluffing. They had to be. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of rage, unpacking boxes with a violent energy, my mind racing. This was my refuge. After 20 years as an Army engineer, building bridges and bases in godforsaken dust bowls, dealing with corrupt local officials and opportunistic warlords, all I wanted was peace, quiet, a place where the rules were clear and applied fairly. I'd chosen this lake house specifically for its isolation at the end of a cul-de-sac, its mature trees offering privacy. I'd read the HOA bylaws before buying. They'd seemed standard, if a bit obsessive about lawn length, and mailbox styles, nothing that hinted at this level of aggression. As the sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of orange and purple, I carried a beer out onto the condemned dock. The wood felt solid and familiar under my feet. I sat on the edge, dipping, my boots in the cool water, and tried to let the tranquility of the place wash over me. But the peace wouldn't come. The encounter had poisoned it. The sound of a fishing boat puttering nearby broke my reverie. An older man with a deeply tanned, leathery face and a worn baseball cap cut the engine and let his boat drift closer. He nodded toward my beer. "Rough first day?" "You could say that," I replied. "HOA president already paid me a visit." The man let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Barb Whitlock. Yeah, she's a real peach, let me guess. The doc?" I stared at him, surprised. "How'd you know?" "She tries it with every new owner on this stretch. Some fold. Pay the retroactive permit fee she invents or they tear their dock out. She's been trying to get me for years." He jerked a thumb toward his own dock, a functional, unassuming structure 2 properties down. "Name's Walter. Welcome to the war, neighbor." "Retroactive permit fee?" I asked, the cold knot in my gut tightening. "She didn't mention a fee. She just said demolish it." Walter's eyebrows shot up. "Is that right? She usually leads with the shakedown. $5,000 made payable to HOA Administrative Services, and suddenly your permit's no longer in error. Must not like the look of you. She only goes straight for the bulldozer with people she thinks she can bully." The second knowledge bomb landed, this one far more explosive than the first. Barbara Whitlock wasn't just enforcing rules. She was running a protection racket. The HOA wasn't her institution of governance. It was her weapon, her personal fiefdom. The illegal permit was the pretext. Compliance, whether through fear or payment, was the goal. Why, was all I could ask. What's her problem with the docks? Walter spat over the side of his boat. Rumor is a big development company wants to buy up all the properties on this North Shore, tear them down, and build some monstrosity of a resort. Unified waterfront, no pesky private docks. They'd pay a premium for it. But they need all. The parcels. Every single one. A few of us old-timers won't sell. So, old Barb, whose husband just so happens to be a real estate attorney, has taken it upon herself to make our lives a living hell until we either give up and leave or lose our properties through foreclosure from her never-ending fines. The pieces snapped together with an almost audible click. This wasn't about a dock being 3 feet too long. This was about land, money, power. My peaceful retirement property was sitting square in the middle of a multi-million-dollar corporate grab, and Barbara Whitlock was the tip of the spear. I felt a familiar calm settle over me, the kind that always descended right before a mission went hot. The anger was still there, but it was now a cold, focused thing. This was no longer a nuisance, it was a conflict, and I knew how to handle conflicts. You find the enemy's center of gravity, their critical vulnerability, and you apply overwhelming force. What happens if you don't pay the fines? I asked Walter. He grinned, a gap-toothed, defiant thing. You get to meet the Waterway Supervisor, another of Barb's lackeys, guy named Dawson. He's the one who'll eventually come to repossess the dock. Mean son of a gun. Likes his job a little too much. I took a long pull of my beer. Dawson. I filed the name away. Noted. I spent the next week trying to do things the right way, the civilian way. I went to the county records office. The clerk, a nervous woman named Sheila, with glasses thick as bottle caps, initially confirmed the permit was valid. When I mentioned Barbara Whitlock's name, she paled, stammered, and suddenly needed to check with a supervisor. She returned, 10 minutes later, refusing to meet my eyes, and told me there was a flag on the file and it was under review. The intimidation ran deep. I hired a surveyor to come out and mark the property lines definitively. He never showed up for the appointment. When I called his office, they said he'd had a family emergency and was unavailable indefinitely. The fines kept coming. They were slipped into my mailbox, nailed to my front door, slid under my mat. Each one was for something new. My grass was half an inch too long. My moving truck had been parked in the driveway for more than 48 hours. I had an unapproved welcome mat on my front porch. The pettiness was breathtaking. The amounts were not. $200, $500, $1,000. They were designed to bleed me dry, to overwhelm me with paperwork and financial death, by 1,000 cuts. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday morning. A new notice was taped inside a plastic sleeve on my door. It was a hearing notice. The HOA Architectural Committee, chaired by Barbara Whitlock, was summoning me to a meeting to discuss the unauthorized dock structure. Failure to appear would result in a default judgment against me. I was out of options. The proper channels were closed to me, clogged with Barbara's influence. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go on a reconnaissance mission. If I was going to be dragged into their kangaroo court, I needed intelligence. I needed to understand the battlefield. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky and a soft, misting rain that muffled all sound, I didn't go to the HOA's meeting place. I went to theirs. I parked my truck a mile away and moved through the shadowy pine groves that bordered the lake with the silent, ingrained stealth of 1,000 night patrols. The air smelled of wet pine needles and rich, damp earth. I could hear the distant hum of the occasional car, but out here it was just me and the dripping trees. I found the HOA clubhouse, a low-slung building with a faux stone facade. A single light was on in the back. The architectural committee meeting. Through a gap in the blinds, I could see them. Barbara held court at the head of a long table, surrounded by a half-dozen sycophants nodding at her every word. And standing near the door, arms crossed, was Carl, the compliance enforcer. My target wasn't inside. My target was their car. Carl's personal truck, a massive black pickup with a HOA security placard on the dash, was parked in the shadows around the side. It was unlocked. A quick glance confirmed what I needed. A yellow parking permit for the county courthouse lot was sitting on his visor. He had reason to be there regularly. Interesting. But it was what I saw next, sitting on the passenger seat floor mat, that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a binder, and scrawled on its white label in black marker was a single word: Dawson, the Waterway Supervisor, Barbara's hatchet man. This wasn't just Carl's truck. He and Dawson shared it, or Carl was doing double duty. I carefully opened the door, the interior dome light thankfully disabled. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cigarillos wafted out. I grabbed the binder and melted back into the woods. I didn't open it until I was back in the safety of my own house. The rain pattering against the windows. The binder was filled with invoices, work orders, and crude maps of the lake. It was a log of Dawson's activities, and it was a chronicle of destruction. Dock removal, 142 Heron Point. Float demolition, 99 Lakeside Doctor. Boat, lift confiscation, 333 Cypress Lane. But it was the notes in the margins that told the real story. Scribbled next to the addresses were names. Whitlock, paid. Whitlock, hold. Whitlock, proceed. She was running the whole operation. She was judge, jury, and executioner, and Dawson was her willing instrument. This was the evidence. This was the proof of the shakedown Walter had told me about. This binder was a roadmap of their corruption. I heard a vehicle slow down out on the main road. Headlights swept across my living room wall. It was the black truck. It idled for a moment at the foot of my driveway, a silent, ominous silhouette in the rain, then accelerated away, its taillights disappearing into the gloom. They knew. They knew I was digging. The noose was tightening. The hearing was in 2 days. I had the evidence, but was it enough? I was holding a stick of dynamite, but I was standing in the middle of their minefield. One wrong move, and I'd be the one who got blown to pieces. Where are you watching from? Comment your city right now, because this fight is about to go nuclear, and you need a front row seat. Ever had an HOA try to shake you down? Type yes in the comments. Let's see how many of us they've tried to bully. The rain fell harder now, drumming a frantic rhythm on my metal roof, a sound that mirrored the pounding of my heart. The twin red eyes of that black truck had vanished, but the threat it carried lingered in the damp, chilled air of my living room like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. They knew. The binder in my hands felt less like a victory and more like a live grenade with the pin already pulled. I spread the contents on my floor, the rough-hewn planks cold beneath my knees. The smell of old paper, cigar smoke, and something faintly chemical, gasoline maybe, rose from the pages. Each invoice from Dawson's binder was a tiny story of extortion. Dock removal, 1 to 42 Heron Point. Invoice number 387, $5,000. Scrawled in the margin, in a messy, masculine hand, Whitlock, paid in full. Then another. Boat lift confiscation, 333 Cypress Lane. Invoice or 391, $7,500. The margin note sent a fresh jolt of anger through me. Whitlock, hold. Owner resisting. The next entry for the same address, a week later, was simpler, colder. Whitlock, proceed. Tore it out. This was their system. Barbara identified the AS target. Dawson applied the pressure, and Carl provided the muscle. The fines were just the opening salvo, the psychological warfare designed to soften you up before the real financial siege began. If you paid the retroactive permit fee, a completely invented sum that went straight into their pockets, you got to keep your property. If you refused, Dawson arrived with a chainsaw and a winch, destroyed what was yours, and then sent you a bill for the demolition. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly illegal. But proving it in a court of law was another matter. These margin notes were compelling to me, but a good lawyer, and Barbara's husband was undoubtedly a good lawyer, would call them hearsay, the unverifiable scribblings of a disgruntled employee. I needed something harder, a payment trail, a bank statement, a signed agreement, something that connected Barbara Whitlock directly to the cash. The third knowledge bomb detonated quietly in my mind, a principle from my days dealing with procurement corruption overseas: follow the money. It always leads back to the throne. These invoices were made out to homeowners, but the payments were instructed to HOA Administrative Services, a separate entity from the official Heron's Crest HOA. That was the shell game. The official HOA had bylaws, meetings, minutes. This Administrative Services was a black box, a ghost corporation for laundering shakedown money. If I could find its bank account, its records, I could blow this whole operation wide open. But first, I had to survive the hearing. The Heron's Crest clubhouse was a temple of petty tyranny. The air inside was artificially chilled and smelled of lemon-scented bleach and expensive perfume. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the polished veneer of a long conference table. Barbara sat at its head, a queen on her throne, flanked by 4 other board members who looked at me with the bland indifference of bureaucrats sent to observe an execution. Carl leaned against the back wall, his arms crossed, his mirrored sunglasses now tucked into his shirt pocket. His eyes were small, piggish, and never left me. "Mr. Vance," Barbara began, her voice dripping with a saccharine formality that made my skin crawl. "Thank you for coming. We're here to discuss the numerous violations at 1101 Heron Point Drive, specifically the unpermitted, non-compliant dock structure." She spent 10 minutes listing the infractions, her voice a monotonous drone of legalese designed to bore and intimidate. The other board members nodded along. I said nothing. I just watched her, noting the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her water glass, the way her eyes flickered to a man sitting in the corner I hadn't noticed before. He was wiry, with a gaunt, sun-beaten face and hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime wrenching on engines. He wore a faded windbreaker with a patch on the breast. Lake Serene Waterway Management, Dawson, the Waterway Supervisor himself. He was here to see his handiwork up close. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Vance?" Barbara finally asked, a smirk playing on her lips. She thought I was beaten. She thought the silence was surrender. I leaned forward, my chair scraping against the tile floor. The sound was harsh in the quiet room. "I do," I said, my voice calm, steady. I held up the package of documents I'd brought. "I have here the original permit for the dock, issued by the county in 1985. I have the most recent survey, conducted last month, which confirms the dock is fully within my property's riparian right-of-way. I also have a written opinion from a retired county zoning official stating that the HCA's authority, according to its own filed covenants, ends at the mean high water line of Lake Serene. This dock is beyond your jurisdiction." I slid the documents across the table. They landed in front of her with a soft thud. Her smirk didn't falter. She didn't even look at them. "Those documents are irrelevant. The association's rules regarding community aesthetics and safety supersede outdated county permits. Your dock is an eyesore. It's a danger. It will be removed." "An eyesore," I repeated flatly. "According to who? You?" "According to the Architectural Committee," she said, gesturing to the drones beside her. "We voted, and I'd like to see the minutes from that vote," I said, "and the specific written criteria you used to deem it an eyesore. I'd also like to know the name of the independent structural engineer who inspected it and certified it as a danger. I assume you hired one given the liability concerns." A faint flush crept up her neck. There were no minutes. There was no engineer. "That information is part of our internal deliberative process. It's not for homeowner consumption." "I see," I said, nodding as if I understood perfectly. I turned my gaze to Dawson. "And Mr. Dawson, here." Is he here in his official capacity as a county waterway manager or as a private contractor for the HOA? Dawson's head snapped up. His eyes, pale and watery, narrowed. I'm here as a concerned party, he grumbled. That dock's a hazard to navigation. I'm sure it is, I said. You'd know all about hazards, wouldn't you, Mr. Dawson? And demolition? Your invoice work is prolific. The room went utterly still. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder. Barbara's face had gone from flushed to a pale, waxy white. Dawson looked like he wanted to leap across the table at me. What is he talking about, Barbara? One of the other board members, a man with a kind face and confused eyes, asked. Nothing, Barbara said, her voice sharp, losing its polished edge for the first time. He's making wild accusations to distract from his own violations. I'm happy to provide the documentation, I said, looking directly at the confused board member. A full binder of it, invoices for work ordered by Mrs. Whitlock, paid to an entity called HOA Administrative Services. It makes for fascinating reading. It seems the community compliance business is quite lucrative. I had them. I could see it in their faces. The other board members were now looking at Barbara with dawning suspicion, not at me with disdain. They hadn't known. She'd kept her little empire a secret, even from her own court. Barbara stood up, her chair screeching backward. This hearing is over. The committee finds the homeowner in violation. The dock is to be removed within 48 hours, or the association will take action. Failure to pay the accrued fines will result in a lien being placed on the property. It was a blatant, panicked power play. She was trying to use raw procedural force to shut me down before I could say another word. I stood up as well, meeting her glare. You can try, I said, my voice low and quiet, yet it carried across the dead silence of the room. But I should warn you. I've already filed a formal complaint with the state's Attorney General's office regarding organized real estate fraud, and I've copied every homeowner in Heron's Crest on the evidence I've gathered so far. They should be checking their emails right about now. It was a bluff. A beautiful, desperate, tactical bluff. I hadn't filed anything yet. I needed that bank information first. But the look on her face, a mask of pure, undiluted fury and fear, was worth it. The other board members were pulling out their phones, their eyes wide. The hearing didn't end. It exploded. Barbara stormed out, followed by a scowling Dawson. Carl remained for a moment, his piggish eyes promising a world of pain before he too left. The remaining board members clustered together, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, completely ignoring me. I walked out of the clubhouse into the bright Georgia sun. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and victory. It was a short-lived feeling. The retaliation was swift and brutal. It began that afternoon. I got a call from the local power company. My service was being suspended due to reported meter tampering. An hour later, the water department called with the same excuse. I had to spend the rest of the day on the phone, fighting to get my basic utilities restored. Then the social pressure started. A community Facebook page I didn't know existed, lit up with posts about the new resident who was threatening our property values and slandering our dedicated volunteers. My background was hinted at. Military man, probably unstable, used to getting his way through intimidation. The comments were a vomit of hateful emojis and calls for me to be run out of our peaceful community. But the worst was the silence from my so-called allies. Walter, the fisherman, didn't wave the next time I saw him on the lake. He just looked away, guilt written all over his face. Barbara had gotten to him. A threat to his own dock, probably. The isolation was complete. I was a pariah. 2 days after the hearing, the 48-hour deadline expired. I knew they would come. I was ready. I heard the low growl of the diesel engine before I saw the truck. It wasn't just the black pickup. It was a flatbed tow truck with a winch, and following behind it, a small skiff on a trailer. Dawson was driving the tow truck. Carl was in the passenger seat of the black pickup, which Barbara was driving herself. This was their victory lap. They pulled into my driveway, the tow truck's air brakes hissing like an angry serpent. I walked out onto my porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, feigning a calm I didn't feel. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Barbara got out, her face a cold mask of triumph. "Your time is up, Mr. Vance. Dawson is here to remove the illegal structure. If you interfere, Carl will place you under citizen's arrest for trespassing on association property." "This is my property," I said, my voice even. "The dock is not," she replied. "Now step aside." Dawson was already unhooking the skiff, ready to motor out to my dock with his tools of destruction. This was it. They were going to do it. All my bluffing, all my evidence hadn't been enough. The raw, physical power was theirs. I took a sip of my coffee. "Before you do anything you'll regret," I said. "You might want to take a look at something." I nodded toward the foot of my dock. Over the last 2 days, while fighting off their bureaucratic attacks, I'd been busy. Using skills I hadn't needed since building forward operating bases, I'd poured a new concrete footer. And set into that fresh gray concrete was a 5-foot-tall, bright red, brand-new fire hydrant. Barbara followed my gaze. Her smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion. "What is that? What is that eyesore?" "That," I said, "is a FDOT-approved, county-permitted fire hydrant, installed by the county fire department yesterday afternoon. They were very grateful. Apparently this end of the lake was outside the required 500-foot coverage radius for fire suppression. This hydrant fixes that." Dawson had stopped what he was doing. He was staring at the hydrant, his mouth slightly agape. "What does that have to do with anything?" Barbara snapped, though a note of uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Everything," I said. "Because that hydrant, and the 10 feet of land in every direction around it, is now designated County Emergency Infrastructure. You touch it, you touch my dock, which is now directly adjacent to it, and you're not just violating HOA rules. You're committing a felony, interfering with emergency services. The county sheriff explained it to me quite clearly. The fines for that start at $25,000 and come with jail time." The fourth knowledge bomb, the most powerful one yet, landed in absolute silence. I had changed the battlefield. I had taken a personal property dispute and elevated it to a matter of public safety. They couldn't touch it now, not without bringing down the entire weight of the county government on their heads. Barbara Whitlock's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The triumph melted away, replaced by a rage so pure it seemed to vibrate the air around her. Her carefully constructed empire, her web of threats and bribes, had just been checkmated by a $50 fire hydrant. She took a step toward me, her finger pointing, her hand shaking. You think you're clever? You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This isn't over until I say it's over." Carl took a step forward, but Dawson put a hand on his arm, shaking his head slowly. He knew. The game had changed. Barbara spun on her heel and marched back to her SUV. "This isn't over, Vance," she screamed over her shoulder, her voice cracking with fury. "You're dead in this town! You hear me? Dead!" They left, the tow truck and the skiff trailing behind the silver SUV like a defeated convoy. I stood on my porch, the taste of coffee and cold, hard victory on my tongue. The sun felt warm on my face. I had won the battle. I had saved my dock, but as I watched her car disappear, her final threat hanging in the air, I knew with chilling certainty that she was right. It wasn't over. I had Gong Kai humiliated her. I had exposed her corruption to her own board. I had blocked her multi-million-dollar payday. A woman like that doesn't just give up. She escalates. I had just won a skirmish, but the war was about to enter a much darker, much more dangerous phase. She was going to come back at me with everything she had, and the next move wouldn't be a fine or a hearing. It would be something. Far, far worse. What would you have done? Would you have stood your ground, or would you have paid her off to make it all go away? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you think this is the end of Barbara Whitlock, you're wrong. What she did next almost cost me everything I had left. Stick around. The takedown is coming. The silence they left behind was heavier than their diesel engine's rumble. The air, once thick with the threat of violence and the smell of exhaust, now carried only the clean scent of lake water and pine. My hands were steady around the coffee mug, but inside a cold tremor was settling deep in my bones. Barbara's final scream wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. You're dead in this town. She wasn't a person to be thwarted. She was a force of nature, a landslide, and I'd just thrown a rock in its path. It would only make the ensuing crash louder. The fire hydrant stood sentinel, its cheerful, ridiculous red a stark defiance against the green and blue of the lake. It was a good move, a tactical feint that had won the day, but it was a defensive move. Barbara would regroup. She would find another angle, a more personal, more destructive method of attack. I had her financial records, the damning binder, but it was still circumstantial. I needed the kill shot. I needed to follow the money all the way back to her bank account. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in psychological siege warfare. The official fines stopped. The hateful Facebook posts vanished, scrubbed clean as if they'd never existed. The silence was more menacing than the noise. It was the silence of a predator circling, choosing its moment. I spent my days pretending to live a normal life, fishing off my now famous dock, painting the porch trim, waving at the occasional passing boat that would quickly look away. But every sense was on high alert. The taste of my food was ash. The sound of a car engine slowing on the main road would snap my head up, my body tensing for a fight. Walter, my fisherman neighbor, finally paddled his boat over on the third day of silence. He cut the engine and let it drift, not meeting my eyes. The smell of fish and old motor oil clung to him. She came to see me, he said, his voice a low grumble aimed at the water. Whitlock. I figured, I replied, not looking at him. What's the price for your silence these days? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. It's not like that. She's got pictures of my grandson playing on my dock. She said if I so much as waved at you again, she'd have Child Protective Services out here claiming the structure was unsafe, a danger to minors. She'd make it so I couldn't see him here. His voice broke. He's all I got, Vance. The fifth knowledge bomb landed softly, but its shockwave was immense. This was her new tactic. She wasn't coming for property anymore. She was coming for family, for legacy, for the things that couldn't be replaced. She was weaponizing love. I understand, Walter, I said, and I truly did. Some lines you don't cross, and she had found his. Stay in your boat. Keep your head down. He nodded, a miserable gesture of gratitude and shame, and puttered away. The isolation was now absolute. I was an island. That night, the attack came. Not with a diesel engine, but with a whisper. It was just after 2 a.m. The deep, profound quiet of the lake was broken by the sound of splintering wood. Not a loud crash, but a precise, brutal crack, crack, crack. I was out of bed in an instant. The cold floorboards beneath my feet, my heart a trip hammer in my chest. I didn't turn on any lights. I moved to the window overlooking the dock. The moon was a sliver, offering little light, but it was enough. A figure was out on my dock. Dawson. He wasn't there to demolish it. He was there to sabotage it. He held a heavy sledgehammer, and, with methodical, vicious swings, he was smashing the support pilings just below the decking. It was calculated. The dock wouldn't collapse immediately. It would wait. It would wait for a sunny afternoon when I had my nephew out there, or a friend, or when I was simply enjoying a moment of peace. Then it would splinter and plunge us into the cold water, with jagged, broken timber lurking beneath the surface. It was an assassination attempt on my future. Rage, white-hot and pure, flooded my system. I wanted to charge out there, to confront him, to put him in the lake. But I stopped. That's what she wanted. An excuse for Carl to restrain a violent homeowner. A criminal charge to muddy the waters. Instead, I did nothing. I stood in the dark and I watched. I committed every movement to memory. The sound of his grunts, the way he moved, a practiced, efficient destruction. And I raised my phone, zooming in, and recorded it. The video was dark, grainy, but it was unmistakably him, and unmistakably my Doc. When he was done, he slipped back into a silent black kayak I hadn't seen and paddled away, a ghost swallowed by the night. The only evidence was the sound of the water lapping against the newly wounded pilings, a sound that now seemed sinister. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the video saved to 3 different cloud accounts. This was beyond fines, beyond corruption. This was attempted manslaughter. She had escalated to violence. The game was over. Now, it was just war. The next morning, I went to the one person in town who might, just might, be able to stand against the tide. The confused-looking board member from the hearing, the one who had asked, "What is he talking about, Barbara?" His name, I'd learned, was Ben Gable. He lived in a modest ranch house a few streets over, its garden slightly overgrown, its porch swing creaking in the breeze. It smelled of damp earth and fresh-cut grass. He answered the door, his eyes widening when he saw me. He looked past me, as if checking for watchers. "Mr. Vance, you shouldn't be here." "They've escalated, Ben," I said, not asking to come in, just stating a fact. "Dawson was on my dock last night with a sledgehammer. He sabotaged it. It's going to collapse, probably when someone's on it." His face paled. "My God, are you sure?" I showed him the video on my phone. In the daylight, it was even clearer. His hands trembled as he held the device. "She's gone too far," he whispered, his voice thick with fear and something else, revulsion. "She was never playing by rules, Ben," I said quietly. "She's running a criminal enterprise, and you've been sitting at the table with her. That makes you an accessory, unless you help me stop it." I saw the war waging behind his eyes. Fear of Barbara. Fear of prison. Fear of doing nothing. The third fear won. "What do you need?" he asked, his shoulders slumping in surrender. "The money, Ben." HOA Administrative Services." "Where does it go?" "I need a bank statement. An invoice with her signature. Anything." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "She's careful. But her husband does the books. He's arrogant. He thinks no one would ever dare look. They keep a lockbox in the HOA clubhouse office. The key is in a magnetic case under her husband's desk drawer. The combination is their anniversary. 10/15. It was the final key. The 6th and ultimate knowledge bomb. The vulnerability of arrogance. The belief that your own power makes you invincible. I didn't break into the clubhouse that night. I walked in. Ben Gable, as a board member, had a key. He let me in, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and old coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the scene of my previous humiliation. The magnetic key case was right where he said. The lockbox was in a filing cabinet marked Archived Minutes. The combination 1015 clicked, and the lid sprang open, and there it was. The Kingdom's ledger, bank statements for HCHOA Administrative Services. The account had received over $200,000 in the last 18 months. And every month, like clockwork, a wire transfer for almost the exact same amount was sent out. To an LLC called Whitlock Holdings. There were invoices, too, dozens of them. and on the line that said, "Authorized by," was Barbara Whitlock's flamboyant, arrogant signature. I took photos of everything, every page, every transaction, the entire, rotten financial core of her empire. I was back home as the sun was rising, the evidence secured, the world feeling new again. The smell of the Dawn Lake air was the sweetest thing I'd ever inhaled. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about going to the police anymore. This needed a broader audience. I made 2 calls. The first was to the state's Attorney General's office, this time for real, and I emailed them the entire trove of evidence. The second was to an investigative reporter from the Atlanta newspaper who'd written about corruption in suburban municipalities. She was on her way before I'd even hung up the phone. The end came, not with a scream, but with a whisper of tires on gravel. It was 3 days later. I was sitting on my porch, the fire hydrant a silent red witness beside me. I saw the convoy before I heard it. Not diesel trucks, but sedans, a state police cruiser, 2 unmarked cars, and a silver news van. They didn't come to my house. They turned into Barbara Whitlock's driveway 3 houses down. I watched through my binoculars as state troopers in crisp uniforms knocked on her grand columned front door. She answered, dressed in another impeccable outfit, her face a mask of annoyed inquiry. I could see her expression change as the lead trooper spoke, his posture rigid, official. The color drained from her face, the mask shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified woman beneath. She took a step back, shaking her head. The trooper gently took her arm. She didn't resist. She seemed to shrink, to fold in on herself as he guided her toward the car. The camera from the news van captured it all. Carl was arrested at his home. Dawson was picked up at the marina, found hiding in the cabin of a boat. The news story broke that evening. HOA president arrested in elaborate extortion scheme. It led the broadcast. The reporter, using the documents I'd provided, laid out the entire sordid operation. The margin notes from Dawson's binder appeared on screen. The bank statements, with Barbara's signature circled in red, were the centerpiece. The fallout was swift and absolute. The development deal evaporated. The official HOA board, led by a shell-shocked but determined Ben Gable, held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to dissolve the administrative services entity and to drop all fines and violations against every homeowner who had been targeted. Walter was the first to come over, a 6-pack of beer in his hand, his eyes wet with relief and apology. Others followed. The siege was over. In the end, there was no dramatic courtroom showdown. Barbara Whitlock took a plea deal. The evidence was insurmountable. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. Carl and Dawson got lesser, but still significant sentences. I finally got my quiet. The real kind. The kind that isn't just an absence of sound, but an absence of threat. The smell of magnolias was just the smell of flowers again. The sound of a boat engine was just someone going fishing. I rebuilt my dock, stronger than before. Sometimes, on warm evenings, I'll sit on the end of it with Walter, the water gently slapping the new pilings, a world of peace stretching out, in every direction. We don't talk about the war much. We don't need to. The victory is in the quiet. It's in the freedom to simply be. I thought I'd wanted vengeance. But what I got was something better. Justice. Not just for me, but for Walter, for the people at 142 Heron Point and 333 Cypress Lane, and for everyone who just wants to live in their own home without fear. The system is meant to protect that. And sometimes, if you're willing to fight for it, and you know where to look, it actually does. This was my story. But it's not unique. They're out there in every town, hiding behind bylaws and boards, thinking their little fiefdoms make them kings and queens. They count on your silence. They rely on your fear. Don't give it to them. Your story could be next. What's the worst thing your HOA has ever tried to pull? Comment your horror stories below. Let's expose them together. If you believe no one is above the law, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. This is how we take them down. One story at a time.